Hey guys, this is Denny.
And this is James from TeaDB.org, bringing you another episode of a Pu'erh tea. And today we're going to be talking about the Dai E Company's 7542 from 2009. And I'll talk a little bit more about what that means in just a second.
Cool. So, Pu'erh tea, as we mentioned last week, is a form of processing that involves fermenting tea and aging it in order to bring out different nuances in the actual plant material. And if you're interested in trying different teas, this is a great sort of step away from your traditional green tea or your loose leaf black tea that you've been drinking your whole life. Trying something new like this might be really appealing. So, James, why don't you go ahead and talk a little bit about this particular tea?
Yeah, so this is a Sheng Pu'erh, which is different from the Shou Pu'erh we had last time. So Sheng also means raw. And so in that sense, this is aged in the traditional manner of aging, where it's stored in a very dry environment and is allowed to age much more slowly than kind of the forced baked pu'erh of Shou. And so this particular pu'erh comes from the Menghai or Dai E Company, which is the biggest pu'erh manufacturer in China. So we made the joke earlier that this is kind of the Lipton tea of China pu'erh. And to a certain extent it's true, but it's certainly much more high quality than Lipton.
Absolutely. So the point being, though, is that tea, especially in China, is a commercial product, and people are producing and drinking a lot of tea in China as well. So the actual recipe for this, the actual kind of tea we're drinking, it's named because there are so many different pu'erhs produced out of this factory.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's the 75242 is the recipe name, and it's one of the most famous recipes in China. Kind of as the communist sort of thing goes, they named it a number, which really is really bad branding, but it's kind of caught on, and that's what it's called. And another interesting number attached to this tea is 901. And the 9 means it's from 2009, and the 1 means is kind of the quality of the pickings of the leaves that are used. The brewing method is very simple. We're going to be using a ton of leaves. We're going to be using 12 grams of leaf for about 120 to 130 milliliter Jianshui clay teapot. And so that's a ton of leaf, and feel free to experiment, and we'll also be using boiling water. So as a result of using so much tea at such a high temperature, we're going to be doing very, very short steepings.
Yeah. James told me that we were doing 12 grams of tea, and I was surprised. I was like, okay, that's great for the demo shot. Now take out the reel, and he's like, yeah, we're using all this. So I'm excited to do this. I don't know if I've had this much tea to water before, but James has had this, and I think he likes it, so I'm excited.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
All right, so we're going to begin in the same way that we begin for basically all our teas, with a quick rinse in our teapot.
So one interesting thing about what James just mentioned with recipes is that pu'erh tea is a form of processing. So it's not like people, in the history of tea, people thought that green tea and black tea were actually different plants. And just look at that beautiful rinse, by the way. It's yellow and gorgeous. But with pu'erh tea always comes from the Yunnan, and we can talk a little bit about the history of why pu'erh tea was invented. But something to keep in mind is that the recipe itself depends on the type of tea leaves and the processing of those tea leaves before they're pressed and aged. So part of the deal with this type of tea is that the variability of the flavor is going to come not only from the pu'erh processing itself, but also the way that the tea is prepared before it's fermented.
Yes, for sure. And so you can see this tea compared to our ripe pu'erh kind of has a much more yellowy color to it, and this one in particular is known for kind of having a really bold, a very bitter flavor. And so if you drink this one too young, it will just destroy your stomach, which is actually a very good sign for how it will age, because generally it'll mellow a little bit as it gets older.
Absolutely.
And so the other cool thing to note about this tea is as we steep it more and more, leaves are actually going to kind of turn to kind of a more green color. And you can see a little bit of that now, but it's going to be much more pronounced in like the 6th, the 7th, the 10th steeping, for instance.
I'm amazed at how much tea we're using and how smooth this tastes. I'm gonna say I know it's the first steeping, but I'm impressed. Really getting a lot of like that floral aspect. Definitely that pu'erh kind of smoky.
Yeah.
Something.
I definitely get a little bit of bitterness, and it's very aromatic. But I really enjoy this tea just for kind of its very, very bold flavor. And I much prefer this to just drinking most black teas, for instance.
Really nice. Yeah. I'm excited to see how this tea evolves. So a little bit about the history of pu'erh. There was so much demand in China for creating tea and exporting tea all over the world that people decided to use a pressing method in order to take what's normally a very lightweight, voluminous product and make it a heavier, compact product. And that was basically how pu'erh production began. It's just simply, how can we make this product more compact so that we can move more of it more easily?
Yep.
And as a result, this whole methodology of producing tea arose, and it's one of the most interesting teas.
Yep. And of course, transportation back in the day took much longer than before, so kind of that fermentation process would happen very, very naturally.
Same things with actually an IPA, interestingly. So the history of beverages, who would have thought? But this is delicious. I'm really enjoying this. And so, are you going to do the same time for steeping pretty much throughout the whole process, or?
Yeah. So this one, because we're using so much leaf and very high temperatures, we're going to be using pretty much instantaneous pour in, pour out as far as the steeping method goes, and we'll just adjust that based off of how we're liking the tea, how we're feeling it. If we feel like it needs a little bit more flavor, it needs a little bit more boldness, we'll add a few seconds to the steep time. And generally what happens to these teas is they'll start to peter out at the 8th or 9th steeping, and so you'll add 15 seconds, and then you'll add 40 seconds. So the steep times may look something like 3 or 4 seconds for the first 6 or 7, and then you'll kind of have 20 seconds, then maybe like a minute, and then you'll decide to stop steeping the tea.
And the tea leaves themselves are just filling up the yixing. This isn't a yixing. What is this called? I forgot.
Yeah, so this is a localized form of clay. It's called Jianshui clay, and it's localized to the Yunnan province. So obviously, because of that, and because pu'erh is grown pretty much exclusively in the Yunnan province, it's very, very well suited towards pu'erh tea. And so it's kind of glazed and polished on the outside, as you can see here, but on the inside it's actually clay. And so it performs similarly to yixing in that regard, in that it begins to absorb those flavors over time.
It also looks really cool, which is always fun as well. So, I mean, one of the cool things about drinking tea and getting into tea, just like anything that's sort of aesthetically pleasing, is, you know, getting cool stuff that you enjoy, collecting things. Some people collect stamps. Some people collect Teaware. So...
Yeah, this is kind of the hipster's version of a yixing teapot, if there's such a thing. It's a very alternative thing. You know, you just want to look cool. It's like, oh, you brew in yixing? Well, I brew in jian shui.
Hey.
Then you just look the other way.
Oh. So this is amazing how much this has changed in the second steeping, in my opinion.
Yeah.
I totally agree with the bitterness now.
Yeah, and... But it's also well balanced in terms of adding some fruity and floral notes to it. And I think this tea is just giving out a whole lot. And even the tea leaves, unfortunately, you can't see, but they were kind of much more timid. They hadn't been fully steeped out for the first steeping, and now they're basically filled to the brim, even when we don't have water in the Jianshui teapot.
It's delicious. And I totally agree with James. I'm surprised by how flavorful and bold this tea is, but at the same time, it's not oversteeped. It's not too intense. It doesn't taste bad. I mean, frankly, you could leave this in for another 5 seconds and it would taste it would taste pretty bad. It would be way too intense. And maybe you could save that with a little bit of extra water, but this brewing method right here is delicious. And it's what always gets me about these different types of tea and different ways of processing the same types of tea is just how different the flavors are. It's amazing that this is all just the same plant and just water. It's just two things combined, but given how you roll it, how long you leave it out, if you fry it, it's amazing.
What trees are on the same mountain, what flowers, are there flowers, is it by the sea? All these things have an influence on what is called kind of the terroir of the tea, and that's kind of a wine term that carries over very nicely to the tea world.
One thing I've also noticed with this tea is that the color has remained consistent throughout.
Yep, and I've steeped this tea all the way out with about the same proportions of tea, and I've gone for probably 15 steepings, and it does maintain that color. It doesn't really change like our gold bud that we brewed last episode.
Yeah, and contrary to the golden buds that we had last episode, I say that this is a little bit more bitter, but actually it's less viscous, which surprises me, but it's quite nice.
So both this tea and this wonderful little teapot, if you want to be super cool, were bought from a company called Yunnan Sourcing, and they also have a U.S. site, which is yunnansourcing.us. So they're a great company. They offer fantastic prices on Pu'erh tea and Teaware in general, so I'd recommend you check them out. Their shipping costs tend to be a little bit high, especially if you're shipping from China, so it's good to kind of do a big bulk order. But their prices on Teaware and just their Pu'erh teas are pretty unbeatable.
And delicious, by the way. So, huge selection. Do your research.
Yep.
Go ahead and email folks there, and they'll give you recommendations.
Yep.
You can learn a lot just by asking around.
And you can buy these nice, great little sample packs like I did here for the 7542. So I'd recommend starting out buying a ton of these little 25-gram, 50-gram, small quantity samples, seeing which ones you like before you invest in kind of these larger cakes.
Cool. And I think that wraps up one more episode of TeaDB, and we will be doing another Pu'erh next time. And thanks for tuning in.
Yep. Thanks for tuning in, guys.